Hello and welcome to First Strike on the Edge. Or is that Strike One on the Edge? Or something like that. So, what we have here is the Böker Plus Strike, a Tanto bladed push button automatic, part of Böker's tactical range of knives, and I suppose the shape and look of it tells the story there. Right, guys, so I'm going to be doing the usual materials, dimensions, and weight, and then dive into design and attributes of this pretty good looking little knife. Right, so we've got a blade steel of Oz 8, and I suppose that also tells a story, a budget blade steel, the Japanese blade steel. And this knife is, as I mentioned in the introduction, it is a Böker Plus, so it is kind of that budget range of Böker knives. Well, maybe one step up from the budget knives. I think the budget knives are the Böker Magnum knives. This is the one step up from that, but still in that budget range. Right. Scales, we've got milled aluminium, and they are scales because we've got stainless steel liners. And in fact, all the hardware on the knife pretty much is stainless steel. So we've got stainless steel pocket clip, stainless steel Torx screws, stainless steel pivot cap, and that's the same for the little push button or plunge lock, depending on which you prefer. And then the little lock there, and I'll speak about that a little bit later, appears to be aluminium, bringing the magnet to it and checking that. Right, standoff stainless steel as well, if I didn't mention that. And then we've got pivot assembly, unfortunately Teflon washers. And I say unfortunately, that depends on how you feel about Teflon washers, but I'll speak a little bit about that later as well. Right, dimensions and weight. Let's get cracking. So I checked dimensions and weight on Böker's site, and my measurement's a little bit different. So the measurements I'll give you is as I measured the knife. So we've got a blade length of 82.5 millimeters, and that is, that is 3.24 inches, getting ahead of myself. Blade thickness is 3 millimeters, and that is 0.12 inches. Handle thickness is 13 millimeters, and that's 0.51 inches, and that's excluding the little button that protrudes a little bit. Closed length of the knife is 118.5 millimeters, and that's 4.66 inches. Overall length of the knife is 201 centimeters, or 20.1 centimeters, and that's 201 millimeters, right, and 7.91 inches. Weight of the knife, right, so as per usual, I have Böker's stated weight, but let's quickly check that against my scale. Let's get that centered up and on. Right, let's see what we have. What are we on? We're on grams. Let's put that down there. 134 grams. Yeah, so slightly off. Their stated weight's 137 grams. I've got 134. Let's check how that looks in ounces. So in ounces, they got 4.8. I have got 4.8. Bang on. Right. Let's get into design and attributes of the knife. So as I mentioned, this is part of the sort of tactical range of knives and clearly visible, the all black in this specific version. And there are a few other options on the knife. I'll speak about those in a second as well, but this one really does look very tactical. So we've got a Tanto blade, a little bit of a probably modified Tanto. We've got a little bit of a drop to the spine of the blade, but you can certainly see the Tanto in the edge and in the grind of the knife. So flat grind, the primary grind is flat, and so is the grind on the tip. And then speak about that edge. So the edge, pretty neat, not the worst I've seen from Böker, and nothing too much to complain about in terms of neatness and evenness on it. Certainly not to Civivi or Wheeze type of standards, but again, nothing much to complain about here. But then sharpness. So this specific version I've got has the little portion of serrations on it. The serrations are incredibly sharp, so use that portion there to cut paper, and it cuts it with ease. So battle to get the words out there for a second. But the plain portion of the edge, it's sort of, you get that kind of tear cut type thing going there. So that would probably need to be touched up, but certainly sharp there. Right, so enough of the edge. Well, maybe not enough of the edge. If we look at that serrated portion of the edge, you can see that it is a little bit of a chisel type serration. So it is ground from that side and then flat on the other side. Not unusual for serrations to be done like that. Right. What else? No sharpening choil, unfortunately, on the blade. It sort of looks like the blade cuts back, that there might be a sharpening choil, but if you look at it edge on, the blade widens towards the ricasso before it gets to that little cutback. So, as I said, no sharpening choil on the knife. Speaking about the ricasso, starts out relatively narrow and then opens up towards the spine of the blade, and that ricasso takes half the height of the blade, so not a particularly deep grind on the blade. And then we've got a very narrow swedge that starts about halfway down the blade, and that stretches all the way to the tip. Spine of the blade nicely squared off, but in general pretty neat. You do find a little bit in certain angles in the light, there's a little bit of roughness to the grind around that portion of the blade there, but generally pretty good. I'm not sure what the black coating on this blade is, can't find that information anywhere else. And then again, I'll speak about the other options, other color options and finish options in a little while. Right, so that's the blade. Let's have a look at the markings on the blade. So we've got the Böker, that is the Böker Plus logo. We've got, I think that is probably just a model number on the blade on the ricasso, and then Oz 8 on that side of the blade. Right, the handle. And this is particularly neatly done. The fit and finish on the handle of this knife is absolutely beautiful. The handle is very, very crisply milled and attractively done, in my opinion. So we've got on this portion of the handle, we've got these little diamond shapes, and you can see they actually get a little bit wider to the spine of the blade. So it's like those diamonds have been stretched out, and we've got the diamonds on the back of the handle here. And in this middle portion, those diamonds from the top become more square shaped, so little pyramids almost from the top. And what that causes is you've got these pretty straight lines here, and as it gets to the middle of the handle, around where your palm would be, it starts forming a swooping line between those shapes, and that is really beautiful, very, very interesting. Just adds that extra bit of interest to the handle. Beautifully done, very, very attractive. And just proof that, you know, because you've got a tactical knife, it doesn't mean that that sort of attention to detail doesn't have to be there, and that a tactical knife doesn't have to be nicely designed and attractive. So, and speaking of attractive things, you've got these milled grooves in the handle, and that's also really beautiful done. So 6 on the spine and then 6 on the front where your fingers would go. And you can see how those have been sort of staggered on either side of the handle, but that also particularly beautifully done. If you look at the edge of those little grooves, there's a little lip just on the edge of them as well. That is just very, very beautifully done. So the edge of the handle all the way around softened a little bit, a slightly rounded edge, so no sharp edges on the handle at all. So in general, the ergos on the knife really good. So getting it in my hand, I've mentioned in other reviews that I have medium-sized hands. I wear a large glove. You can see what that looks like. So plenty of space for my hands on there. I think even bigger hands, there's still a bit of place on the handle there. It's maybe just the really big mittens where you might stray off the handle a little bit, but as I say, the ergo is really good. We've got this very aggressive jimping on the back of the handle towards the blade in that little hollowed portion of the blade, and your thumb very comfortably falls into that. So the grip and purchase on this handle with that machining on the scales and that jimping is exceptionally good. No finger choil on the blade, but the shape and distance of that choil from the blade, it does feel like you are kind of choking up on the blade anyway. You don't really feel like you need to get any closer to that blade. That is very, very comfortable. Right, what else do we need to cover off? Let's just have a look at that little pivot cap. So another little bit of interesting design on the pivot cap, where we've got the little circles that have been machined into that. That also very attractively done, quite plain on the other side, and you can see one little flat edge on the pivot on that side. So if you do take the knife apart, that little area is not going to spin, so it makes it a little bit easier to get the knife apart. Right, let's get that close. Standoffs, pretty plain standoffs on the knife. We've got just a sort of barrel-shaped standoffs, open back design on the knife, so easy enough to get in there if you do want to clean the knife, and if you really want to disassemble it, as I mentioned before, we've got the Torx screws as well. Right, let's have a look at the pocket clip. So the pocket clip in this particular guys, the way it is now, is tip up, but it is reversible, but reversible with the difference. It is reversible to tip up or tip down. So you can see the extra holes that have been drilled in, and a little bit of milling, a little shape there to allow that pocket clip to be moved onto the other side. But an odd choice, in my opinion. You've gone to the effort to make it reversible in inverted commas, but tip up or tip down. And I don't know too many people who prefer to carry a knife tip down. I would have probably rather put the effort into doing that on the other side and then make it left or right hand tip up. But anyway, that's the choice that they made. Long pocket clip, quite a generous amount of space behind the pocket clip, but the screws are not countersunk, so that does take up quite a bit of space in the back of that pocket clip. Not particularly deep carry, that in your pocket. You're going to see that pocket clip and a little bit of the knife sticking out, but if you do tip down as an option, then that is very deep carry. You can see how high the knife, how high the pocket clip would mount on that side, and then that would be pretty much hidden, but that's only if you do the tip down option of carry. Another little interesting and nice touch is behind the pocket clip. We've got this massive lip that possibly, in my opinion, sticks out a little bit too far, but again, maybe that makes it easier to get over cloth. A little bit of springiness on the clip, by the way, just have a look at that. But you can see just under that point where the clip does hit the handle, they've actually stopped the get an angle. You can see they've stopped the milling. There's a little bit of a flat area, and that just to help cloth glide in and out there. It doesn't chew up your pocket and makes it easier to get in and out of your pocket. Right, what else did I mention? We've got a lanyard hole at the back, so a little round lanyard hole drilled through the scales and the liner. And then that liner, I mentioned the stainless steel liners, no milling done on the liners, so no attempts to make the knife any lighter, but the knife is pretty light. And how light do you want a tactical type knife to be, I suppose? Right, what else? Let's speak about the action of the knife. So I mentioned the fact that it is a push button or plunge lock automatic knife. I'm going to keep quiet as that deploys. So that does really feel good. The blade flies out there. It is very, very smooth. And I guess that's what you expect from a blade that is running on Teflon washers, but very, very smooth, and the action really good. Then we've got that little bit of lock. You can see a bit of a lock. You can see the lock there and the little red button. So that is now obviously not safe with the red little dot showing. Push the button and that deploys it. And then if you want to lock it in its open position, you just push that forward, hide the little red dot. That is now safe. The button won't work and the knife can't fold. And then that works the same way when the knife is folded, and I suppose that's the real purpose of the lock. Push that up, accidentally push the button, and it will not deploy. And I think that's probably a good idea on this style of button lock. You can see that I mentioned it before, that the button lock protrudes quite a bit, and it is quite easy to push that. So that's the way of doing it, as opposed to this knife, the only automatic knife that I have in my collection, and this is the Microtech Stitch. But in this particular case, that button is a lot heavier to actually push, and we've got a little bit of a lip around the button, and when you activate this, deploy this blade, you have to push that button below that lip. So you've got to push it far in, and it takes more effort for the blade to fly open. Boy, does that fly open with meaning. I forget just how much until I deploy it again. But yeah, so no lock on there, but a little bit of a different way of doing that lock. the construction of this knife as well around the pivot is really, really overbuilt. We've got that stainless steel bushing. If you haven't seen my review on this, please check it out. I speak a little bit more about the construction around that area of the knife. Interesting also that this automatic knife also has the aluminium handle. No scale and liner construction on this, but it has the aluminium handle as well. But a sort of more robust construction on this knife. Unfair to compare the two, of course, because this is a Microtech and a very, very expensive knife, and this, as I've mentioned now a few times, is more of a budget knife, but it does feel good. The action really, there we go, the lock certainly works. Pull that out of the way. The action really does feel good. The only downside, again, the decision to have Teflon washers on the knife. And let's just pause here and speak a little bit about the quality of Böker knives. So Böker have got a little bit of a reputation of sometimes producing, well, the fit and finish to be a little bit shoddy, which is sad because they can equally make really, really good knives. And I've got a couple of Böker knives in my collection. I've just brought a few of them out here to give you examples of some of their knives really built beautifully. And is the Böker Minos. So part of the Böker tree brand, they're sort of more expensive knives, but beautifully built. The knife feels the fit and finish, and it feels like a what's the word? A custom knife. So beautifully built knife, and a very chunky knife as well. But they're an example of what Böker can do. And then this one as well, the Böker Pipsqueak, another knife that feels like a custom, beautifully built. Also part of the, again, the tree brand. It is the sort of more expensive range of Böker knives, but it just goes to show that they can build really beautiful, almost dropped that, beautiful knives. And then the last one I brought out, also Böker tree brand, and another Anso design, that Minos, by the way, this one is an Anso designed knife. And this as well, and so this is the Böker Haddock, but equally beautifully constructed knife, and again a knife that feels like a custom knife. So really beautiful. And Böker do that. They do tend to work with some very good designers, but just disappointingly, sometimes the fit and finish does let them down. And quite often the case, it will be the knives in this price range, the what did I say, the Böker Plus range. But this knife, pleasingly well made. It does look well constructed. A little bit of that roughness on the blade, but the handle certainly beautifully built. Blade centering really perfect. The action very good. Also wanted to bring in one or two other Böker knives here, because looking this knife open, it did remind me of some of the other Böker knives I have in my collection. A little bit of a family resemblance. And where is it? So it's this knife. I think I've used this knife once before in a comparison. And this is the Böker Turbine, old Böker knife. But you can sort of see around the handle, especially around this area, a little bit of a family resemblance between those. We've got the jimping at the back of the handles, and then that general shape around here. In this specific instance, you've got the little holes drilled into the pivot cap that resembles that as well. But I think you can see what I mean, a little bit of a family resemblance, especially in that part of the handle on those two knives. And then the other one is this, a knife that I've had for a very long time, been part of Böker's lineup, I think, for a long time as well, and that's the Automat Kalashnikov 47, the AK-47 knife. But once again, specifically looking at that portion there, that area there of the handles, you can see a little bit of that family resemblance jimping over there in that hollowed area of the handle, and the sort of general shape around that area. I don't know if you can see what I see, but they certainly look like they are family. Another thing I didn't mention on that other knife, let me just get that back on here. Speaking about family resemblance, you can see those mold shapes, this little G10 insert, but those mold shapes on the handle that resemble that a little bit as well. Right. Let's get those out of the way. And guys, before I do forget, let me just give my gratitude once again to Blades and Triggers, another knife that has been supplied by Blades and Triggers for me to review. I really do appreciate the ongoing support of the channel. So check this out and other knives out and other tactical goodies on their website, BNT Online. Right, and I guess that just leaves me to do size comparisons and then a little bit of a summary, my thoughts on the knife. So let's start with the knives that I usually use, and this is a knife that I've been using of late. This is the Spyderco PM3, the smaller version. Give you a little bit of scale there. Right, get that out. Then the Spyderco Manix 2. And this actually surprised me when I put these two knives next to each other. I thought that the Böker Strike was a little bit smaller, but in terms of length between those two knives, they are almost identical. And I think weights as well. So very, very similarly sized knives, those two. Right, let's get that out. And where's the other knife? Right, that I use, the Medford Slim Midi, also very similarly sized knives there. Let's get that straight up a little bit on screen. So also very similarly sized. The Böker Strike a little bit thicker, but then again, that is the Slim Midi, the Medford. All right, get that out. And then lastly, the knife that I always do use, and I always do say it, and I'm going to say it again, that I use because it has been out for so long, and I think a lot of people will be familiar with that knife, and that is the Benchmade Mini Barrage, just to give you a little bit of scale on that. Right, have I spoken? No, I haven't. I haven't spoken about the options on the knife. So let's speak about that quickly. So a couple of color options, and you also get a different blade shape. So this is the Tanto, as I've mentioned already. You also get this in a drop point blade, and then you get the knife with the serrations and without, so one with just a complete plain edge as well. And then in terms of color and finish variations as well, you get a black handled version that has the grey or silver stone-washed blade instead of the black coated blade. Then you get one that has the coyote finish on the aluminium scale, and that comes with a black stone-washed blade, and that also in the drop point and Tanto bladed versions. And then you also get a non-auto version, so it's still a push-button plunge lock style knife, but it is not an auto open, so you don't get that action on the blade. And I suppose that's for areas where legislation maybe does not allow you to have an auto opening knife. So there is that version as well. So that is the options on the knife. So my summaries: a good looking knife, it seems to be very well made. Generally the fit and finish really well, a little bit of roughness on the blade, but certainly the handle is beautifully constructed, really nicely made. Feels good in hand. I mentioned great action. The downside to me will once again be those Teflon washers. I think if this knife had phosphor bronze washers in there, I really would probably quite highly recommend it. So the two downsides are possibly, well, definitely for me, the Teflon washers. That might not be an issue for you. And then maybe the blade steel. Maybe you'd want to complain about the blade steel. But, you know, for a budget steel, you know, okay. Maybe okay for a hard use type knife. Again, it is in that budget range of knives. But I must be honest, if I was looking for an auto opening tactical look of knife round this sort of size, I would probably go for another knife that I reviewed, and that is the Smarty Fox. So the Fox knives, Smarty Fox. So if you haven't seen that review, go and check that out. But also an auto opening, also with a little manual lock on it. I would probably go for that. But this blade shape, this style of knife might appeal to you. Get it in your hands, check it out, and maybe you don't have the issues with it that I do. But all in all, as I said, a pretty nicely finished off knife, and a good looking knife. So there we go. Let's just have a look. See, I don't think it's going to allow me to leave it sort of flat in that side. It's because of that big pocket clip. So I'm going to leave it this side up, and that all that really leaves me to do is, once again, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it when you do. And as I always do say, please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you can be notified every time I release a new video. Because again, as I always do say, I really would love you to join me more often. And other than that, you go well and God bless.